Welcome back, everyone. For today's video, we are going to be taking a look at the 6th round of the Spilimbergo Open, which is being held in Italy. Now, the famous YouTuber and aspiring Grandmaster candidate, Levy in action once again. After drawing in rounds 2, 3, and 4, he had a big win in round number 5 with the white pieces, and now in round number 6, he's playing one of the Indian juniors, Nikhil M, who is rated 2198. Now, I've spoken about this a little bit over time, but one thing I've noticed is a lot of the Indian players who are traveling to Europe to play in these open terms, generally their ratings are actually a little bit deflated. They're usually playing stronger than the ratings they have, so this has the potential to be a very, very dangerous pairing for Levy, and also because Levy's opponent is on 3.5 out of 5, and he has already beaten a 2300 level player. So let's jump right into the action. The game starts with the move d4, we get d5, knight to f3, knight f6, and now we have the move g3. Now Levy's opponent is trying to play a very flexible setup. Normally white would play c4, and after e6, then you could play g3 going to the Catalan, but instead we get g3 on move number 3. Now Levy decides to play the move bishop g4, we get the move bishop g2, and now we have the move e6. Here, Levy's opponent decides to castle, and after bishop to e7, c4, and c6, we get this very standard position here where white has kind of played a Catalan. Black is also mixing some systems here. You have the classic double connect 3, which is also known as the Pyramid of Giza, and here the game continues with the move knight bd2. Levy plays move h6 here. This is a quiet move where Levy intends to retreat the bishop back to f5, and if white ever tries to go after the bishop, you retreat it to h7. So we get rook e1, Levy plays bishop f5, trying to prevent white from playing e4, and also intending to move the bishop backwards. The game continues with b3, castles, bishop b2, and now Levy plays the move a5. Now this move is a situation where Levy is trying to expand on the queen side here. He might want to play b5, he might want to play a4, but he is taking some space. Game continues with a3, and now we get the move knight bd7, we have knight to e5, and Levy decides to trade the knights. Now at this point, white has to make a big decision. What are you playing for? White can always trade the pawns on d5, but after c takes d5 here, let's say rook c1 and rook c8, it's a symmetrical pawn structure here. Both sides have 5 pawns extending from the h-file. I should do a better job of arrowing this. From the h-file all the way over to the d-file. So white can't really get a lot of counterplay on the c-file here, which is why white decides to play knight e5, and the hope here is that white can play e4 and open up the scope for the long bishop on the diagonal. We get knight takes knight, pawn takes, Levy goes knight to d7, and now we get this move e4. Now this move is a slight mistake here, and the reason it's a mistake is that in the position, what white should do is trade the pawns on d5, play e4, and after takes, and then knight takes e4 here, white has this very long open diagonal. For example, I know the computer says knight c5 is very slightly better for black, but after takes, you'll notice that the pawn on b7 can be hanging in these lines, whereas in the game, when we get this move e4 being played right away, after pawn takes pawn and bishop takes pawn, let's just say knight takes, for example, after knight c5, you'll notice that the diagonal is always closed here. There simply are no threats for the light square b. So instead, we get bishop takes e4. Levy correctly plays the move knight to c5 here. We get the trade of the bishops. And Levy, even though he has double pawns on f5 and f7, he wants to put this knight on e6 to stop white from being able to open up the diagonal for the other beat. For example, if I just play a random move, like let's just say rook e2 and knight a6, white can play e6 here, opening up the long diagonal. And black is okay, but if you're able to stop that when we look at this position, as we'll see in the game, bishop c3 and knight to e6. Now the bishop has no scope whatsoever, and black can always play for f4 to get rid of the double pawn. So the game continues with queen c2. Levy plays g6, guarding the pawn. No worries about the diagonal here because the pawn is in the way of the bishop, and the pawn is never going anywhere. We get the move knight to f3. Levy plays queen b6, and now we get the move bishop to d2. Levy plays king g7 to guard the pawn on h6. Here his opponent plays the move bishop e3, and Levy decides to play this move queen a6. Now I think that if Levy were having a slightly better tournament and he hadn't drawn so many games against lower rated players, he would have been more inclined to play a move like bishop to c5, trying to trade the bishops and bring the rook to the center, or even playing a move like c5 here, potentially with the idea of going a4 down the road. Instead, Levy goes queen a6. He's probably figuring keep the pieces on the board, keep the game going, and good things can happen. Here his opponent plays the move h4, and this is a very slight inaccuracy. Again, I'm not going to be too critical because of the level the players are at, but the computer really likes to move knight to d4 here, trying to get rid of this very nice knight, which is blockading the pawn on e5. Black is still probably relatively okay here after, say, rook a d8, knight takes e6, and f takes e6. But white is very slightly better, as a dark square b for white has much more scope than dark square b on e7. And ultimately, white also has a little bit more space due to the placement of the pawns on e5 and e6. Anyhow, we get to move h4, and here Levy plays move h5, and this is actually a very serious positional mistake, but it's not easy to criticize Levy for this move, because what Levy is thinking here is in probably, I'm going to say like 95% of the time. Let me just go back to another position. Let's just go all the way back here just to illustrate something. Let's just make some random moves here. Ignore the evaluation bar. I'm just setting up something. Probably if you get a position like this, 95% of the time, if white pushes h4 to go h5 here, black is going to have to play h5 to stop it, and vice versa. If black were to say get h5 here, white almost always will play h4 to stop the h5 pawn push. Unfortunately for Levy, he's trying to follow this basic principle, but in this exact position when he plays h5, it's actually a fairly serious mistake. Let me just go forward here, because what h5 does is it now opens up some dark squares, very specifically on g5 and potentially c5 or d6 down the road, whereas white's threat of h5 here is actually not really a threat. If you play a move like rook d8, and white goes h5, and now you play c5, and white takes, you'll notice that your pawn structure is actually very harmonious now. All the pawns are connected. So Levy decides to play h5. He's thinking, well, I got to stop h5 based on the basic principle, but unfortunately, this is one of those situations where this is wrong, as we'll see in the game. So now we get c5 here. Levy plays rook d8. His opponent goes rook d1. We get to move rook to d5. Important move, by the way, because if black plays a move like, let's just say king g8, white can potentially sack the rook with rook to d6. And if you take the rook here, after e takes d6, there are going to be some serious issues here. Let's just say you put the king on h7. White gets queen c3. There's the threat of knight g5 down the road. There's a threat of bishop c1 and bishop to b2. And also your rooks are on closed files. The rooks have no scope whatsoever. So Levy goes rook to d5, preventing white from sacking the rook. We get takes, rook to d1, and now Levy plays the move rook to d8. Now in this position, his opponent plays king g2, and this is actually a fairly serious mistake. Now what's interesting about this is that if the king, with the king on g1 here, after takes, rook c8, b4 in this position, if white plays move rook takes d5 here and black goes b6, here white can play the move knight to g5, and after knight takes c5, now white can play e6, and white is much better. And the reason I mention this is that in this position, after king to g2, black can actually change direction and do this, because now in this position with the king on g2, after you go b6 here, if white plays move knight to g5, you can go queen to b7, hitting the king and the rook on this long diagonal, and white is simply losing the game. If you try to guard the rook with queen d1, I take with the rook, and you will lose this rook on d5. You'll be down a rook, and you will resign very politely. So here Levy could have done this. I don't fault him, because probably when you've already played rook d8, you're not suddenly going to see bishop takes c5 here if you rejected it on the previous turn. So Levy goes king to f8 here, trying to bring the king to the center of the board. He's arguing that all the pawns here are very secure. You have the knight and the bishop, and with the king coming to e8, black should be okay. So we get the move queen c3 from Nikhil. Levy goes d4 here, and this is a mistake. Now, do I blame Levy? Not at all. King e8 is slightly better here, but Levy probably thought that after b4 and takes, for example, white has a 2-on-1. You have this weak pawn on d5. White can go knight d4, and it just feels like you're running out of counterplay. So Levy decides to go for it with d4. We get knight takes pawn, knight takes c5, and here we have the move bishop g5 being played by his opponent. Now, this is an excellent decision to go bishop g5. You're trying to go after the knight, you're trying to open up the center of the board, and it's already feeling very scary. Now, this is also a clear sign that Levy's opponent is definitely not a 2200 level player. His opponent is playing a very, very finesse middle game. He's showing great technical skill, by the way, just creating this pawn on d5, playing for bishop g5, h4 as well. All these moves are the hallmarks of someone who is not 2200. So we get the move queen b6 from Levy. Here his opponent plays the move e6. And while this is a slight mistake here, I might point out that here e6 is apparently winning. Nonetheless, it is a great move here, trying to open up the scope for the queen. Levy plays move f6, we get check, and now Levy goes king g8. Now in this position, king d8 would have been a much better move here, bringing the king closer to the center of the board. And after bishop to e3, for example, here after takes, black actually can play queen to c6 and go into this endgame after takes, bishop d8, knight d6, and king d7. White is still a little bit better, but black is not in a lot of danger. Instead, Levy goes king g8, and now after bishop e3, black has to be really, really careful. If black plays knight takes e6 here, now after knight takes f5, you're hitting the queen, but you're also attacking the bishop because the king is not on this e8 square guarding this bishop on e7, and black is actually in a lot of trouble here. So Levy ends up playing this move queen d6 after a 3-minute think. I have not watched his recap of this game. I'm not sure if he's done one yet, actually. But this move, I think, was simply a blunder by Levy here. I presume that he saw knight takes f5, which is played in the game, attacking the queen, and he thought after queen c6, king to h2, he could take the rook and go for the checkmate in one. Unfortunately here, white has knight takes bishop, which is a check, forking the king and the queen, and wins the game. So we get this position after king h2, and now Levy plays the move pawn takes knight on f5. We get the trade, and here we have queen takes c5. Now at this point, white is better, but queen takes c5 is a slight mistake. So if white were to take with the bishop here, after queen takes e6, white has queen to f3, hitting both the juicers at the same time, and after, say, b6 and bishop to e3, black is actually in a lot of trouble here. You're really struggling to guard these pawns on the king side, and white is technically winning. Instead, we get queen takes c5, which is also quite reasonable. Queen takes pawn, and we have the move a4 being played. Now, this is a move that is not the best move in the position, but very, very good technical move from Nikhil, trying to fix these pawns on the opposite color of the dark square b. Levy goes king f7, we get queen b5, he goes b6, and now we have the move queen d3 being played. Bishop c7, and now we get queen d1, king g6, queen c2, bishop d8, and we have queen c4. Now, what you'll notice about this position very specifically is that right here, Nikhil has forced Levy's pawns on the queen side to be on the same color as the b. These pawns are on the opposite color, so all these endgames here pose great risk for Levy. Great risk if we get there. Also because white can try to create a passed h pawn as well, which we're going to see in the game. So Levy goes king f7, we get king to h3. Here he goes king e7, not f4 check, by the way, trying to win the bishop on e3. Because after f4 check, white trades the queens and simply takes the pawn on f4 and is up a pawn in the endgame. So, in this position after king h3, we get king to e7, bishop to f4, and here Levy goes queen to e1. Now, Levy is only very slightly worse here, but I really don't like this move, queen to e1 here, because it's trying to play for activity. I would have liked to have seen Levy just wait with the king on f7 and e7 here and force Nikhil to make a critical decision. But instead we get queen e1, king g2, and here Levy plays the move queen e4, and now Nikhil decides to trade the queens on e4. Now the computer will tell you that after queen to e4, king to h2 is the best move, but after, say, queen to e6, white is still only actually queen e6 might lose here because there's probably some queen maneuver, but here after takes and king f7, probably it's still better for white. It's actually going to likely transpose to the game, but I would have liked to have seen this happen. Instead, Nikhil decides to trade the queens and goes immediately for this move f3. What white wants to do is white wants to try and create a pass pawn on the h file if possible. Levy trades on f3, and here he plays the move king to e6. Now, it's really, really unfortunate that Levy doesn't have time to play f5. Let's just say white were to go bishop h6. After king e6, bishop e3, and bishop c7, you'll notice that while black has these two pawns on the queen side that are on the same color as the light square b, now white has two pawns on the king side that can permanently be targeted by the dark square or the black bishop here. So it's really a shame that Levy can't go f5, but nonetheless, he is still okay here after the move king e6. We get g4, takes, f5, and now the move king g3. Now, at this point in the game, Levy has defended very well. He should be able to draw if he finds the right move, but unfortunately for Levy, this is a 50-50 where he has to see the drawing concept. If he does not see the drawing concept here, he is losing. And unfortunately, Levy ends up playing this move bishop to e7, and now this game is technically lost. What Levy had to do was sack the bishop for the pawn, and after takes, king to d5, let's say white goes bishop e3, you play the move king to c6, and now let's just say white were to, I guess white can't sack the bishop because this is still, I guess, technically a draw, but black will get both the pawns on the queen side, and if white plays the natural move, which of course is king to g5, now you have b5 here. If white trades the pawns on b5 and goes bishop d2, you have a4, b4, a3, takes, a2, bishop c3, you queen the pawn, white takes, and then we get a bishop versus a king, and this is a theoretical draw, or it just ends in a draw, I should say. So if white were to play the move king takes f5, after takes king and king to b7, this is a forced draw here. Black waits with the king in the corner, and this bishop is the wrong color. You'll notice that this king, it is a light color square in the corner, and this is a dark square b. So white can actually never win this endgame. If this pawn magically were on the h file, it would be winning because the bishop would be able to cover the queening square. But with this bishop on e1, the square on a8 is a light square, and this is just a draw. So Levy instead plays bishop e7, and now after bishop to e3, it still is a draw if Levy were to go f4, takes, and sack the bishop again and run the king all the way over. But at this point, it's pretty clear he's not going to play f4 and then sack the bishop. It just doesn't make any sense. And if you were to sack right away here, you actually are losing because white can take all the pawns on the queen side. So Levy goes bishop d6, we get king f3, bishop c7, and now after h5, white is simply winning because black's bishop is tied down to these pawns. The bishop will try to escort the h pawn of the board, and white can also start maneuvering the king all the way over to the queen side. Levy goes king f6, we get bishop to f4, he goes bishop d8, king e2, bishop e7, king d3, bishop c5, king c4, bishop f2, and now we get this move king d5, which is simply sublime. If Levy's opponent were to run the king to b5 here, black can basically just wait forever in this position because white can never take on b6 since now the f pawn will run all the way up the board. Instead, we get king to d5, Levy goes bishop h4, we get the move bishop e3, and now we have bishop e1. Now, the reason Levy played bishop h5 here is that if he goes bishop g1 after h6, king g6, and king e6, white is simply winning here. When you play bishop d4, now I can go h7, and after takes and king f5, this white king is just simply going to run all the way over to the queen side, and now after king c6 and bishop b6, white will win both of the pawns. So Levy goes bishop h4, he's hoping that white will play king c6, and then he can get bishop g5, and now this f-pawn is running up the board, and black actually will save the draw. Instead, his opponent finds bishop e3, which is simply the best move, winning the pawn on b6. Levy goes bishop e1, we get to move h6, another amazing move here. After bishop takes b6 here and king g5, black is very much in the game once again and probably can save it. But Levy's opponent plays h6 here, he goes bishop to g3, we got bishop takes pawn, bishop to e1, trying to guard the pawn on a5 here. Now we have bishop e3, king g6, and then move bishop f4 played once again, stopping black from pushing this f-pawn up the board. And at this point, Levy is simply lost. He goes bishop c3, king e6, bishop e1. We get the move h7, takes, and now white is simply going to bring the king all the way over to the b5 square and go bishop c7 and take on a5. King g7 is played, we get king e6, king g6, bishop c7, bishop d2, and now the white king runs all the way over, and after bishop takes a5, Levy Rozman resigns this game. A very, very disappointing loss from certainly against Nikhil M. What I would say about this game is that Levy's opponent played a phenomenal positional game. His opponent is not a 2198 player. This kid is playing at least 2300, and it's one of the unfortunate realities about playing open tournaments is sometimes you're going to run into junior players who are underrated significantly, and when that happens, I mean, sometimes things just don't go your way. And for Levy, it's a very tough game to lose like this, but really, even though he had a chance to draw, his opponent played a great game. You kind of have to tip your cap to Nikhil because he simply played a phenomenal game of chess, and it's definitely disappointing for Levy, but that's kind of how life goes. So for Levy, he loses this game. That means that he now is on 3.5 points out of 6. A very, very tough loss. He's definitely going to lose quite a few rating points in this tournament, but he still has 3 rounds to try and finish strong, win a couple of games, rebuild the confidence before the tournament is over. So we definitely hope that Levy can start winning some games as the tournament winds down, but very, very tough game for him in the 6th round of the Spilimbergo Open, but that's just kind of how it goes. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this recap from round 6 of the Spilimbergo Open being held in Italy. If you're not already subscribed to the channel, make sure that you smash that subscribe button below, and we'll be back soon with some more great recaps from Levy's tournament and St. Louis and everything else in the world of chess. See you guys. Have a great one. Bye.